This might sound strange, but please bear with me. When I was in high school, there was a kid who told everyone he was a demon. I still don't feel comfortable even writing his real name, for reasons you'll soon understand, so I'll call him Patrick, although his actual name sounded like something straight out of a Shakespearean play. Patrick was an odd character, to say the least. He was socially awkward, didn't interact much, and had this hollow, empty stare that sent shivers down people's spines, including the teachers. His presence was unnerving, even when he wasn't doing anything. He had this habit of wearing the same blank gray hoodie every single day without fail. I swear, I don't think he ever washed it because he always smelled bad, like really bad, like he was covered in a thin layer of filth. He never took the hoodie off, even in the sweltering heat of the summer. And the worst part, he always wore sunglasses, even indoors. No one could get him to take them off. At first, the teachers would tell him to remove them. But after a while, they stopped trying. I think they just didn't want to engage with him. There was something about him that made people uneasy. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe just a little shorter than average, and his physical appearance was fairly nondescript if you could see beyond the hoodie and the sunglasses, that is. The truth is, most of us couldn't tell what he really looked like because he always had that hood pulled up, and the sunglasses made it impossible to make out his eyes, which gave him an even eerier aura. Here's where things start to get strange. Patrick didn't really have friends, at least, not in the traditional sense. What he did have was this bizarre tendency to adopt people. By adopt, I mean that if he decided, out of the blue, that he liked you, he'd walk up to you and say, "You're adopted now," and that was it. You were part of his circle, whatever that meant. Apparently, being adopted meant you were somehow safe from him, although none of us really knew what we were supposed to be protected from. He didn't adopt many people, though just a few. And yes, I was one of the lucky ones. Looking back, I think Patrick adopted me because he had some sort of crush on me, though I never encouraged it. None of us took his whole demon act seriously. We all figured he was just a troubled kid, which in many ways he definitely was. This whole thing happened in Wayne, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. It's a pretty quiet town, so stories like Patrick stuck out, becoming part of the high school lore. There was another girl, Gabby, who had also been adopted by him. Patrick's crush on her was more obvious than it was on me. Everyone knew it. Gabby was part of my close friend group, so we would talk about it sometimes, mostly just laughing it off. One particular day, a bunch of us were hanging out on the dugouts behind the high school. It was me, Gabby, Laura, and Luke. We were killing time, just talking and messing around, when somehow the conversation drifted toward Patrick and his obvious crush on Gabby. We were all laughing about it, and Gabby was embarrassed, but it was all in good fun. Now, we never really used Patrick's real name because it was long and clunky, so we had a nickname for him. I can't remember what it was, but that's not the important part. What matters is that on this day, Laura, who was one of those people who liked pushing boundaries, used Patrick's real name. The third time she said it, something truly unsettling happened. Out of nowhere, and I mean nowhere, Patrick jumped on top of the dugout. I'll never forget the sight of him standing there, silhouetted against the sky, holding a baseball bat in his hands. It wasn't a normal kind of scary, like when you're startled by something or someone jumps out at you. No, this was worse. It was unsettling, like something from a nightmare you can't shake off. He didn't say a word, he just stood there staring at us with that hollow expression. We all went silent, immediately regretting our conversation. I gave him a little wave, trying to break the tension, and he nodded back at me before silently jumping back down to the ground and walking away without another word. After a few moments of stunned silence, we all burst into nervous laughter. It was that kind of laughter where you're not really sure if you should be laughing or panicking. On the surface, we laughed it off, but deep down, I was disturbed by the whole thing. Something about the way he showed up so suddenly, the way he stared at us, it didn't sit right with me. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but things got even weirder. Another incident happened not long after, and this one was significantly more disturbing. I was at Laura's house, hanging out in her room. It was a typical day, nothing out of the ordinary. Laura's parents were home, and we were just talking about random stuff. At some point, Patrick's name came up in conversation again. We weren't even saying anything bad about him. His name just naturally came up. The strange part? We said his real name 3 times, just like before. About 10 minutes later, we heard Laura's front door slam shut. We figured maybe one of our other friends had shown up, so we went downstairs to check. Laura's house was the kind of place where people came and went all the time, often without any notice. Her mom was super laid back, so it wasn't unusual for friends to pop by unannounced. But when we turned the corner into the living room, we were both stopped in our tracks. Standing there talking to Laura's mom was Patrick. He wasn't supposed to be there, and there was no way he had any reason to just randomly show up like that. Laura's mom, who seemed surprisingly calm about the whole thing, asked him what he was doing there. His reply was bone-chilling. He simply said, "I was summoned. I can't explain how uncomfortable that made me." Laura's mom made some small talk with him and then, politely but firmly, asked him to leave. He did so without any resistance, silently walking out the door. As soon as the door closed behind him, Laura and I ran back upstairs, our faces pale with shock. We couldn't believe what had just happened. The two of us started connecting the dots, the time on the dugouts, and now this. It was the same pattern, say his name 3 times, and he appears. I know how ridiculous that sounds, like some sort of urban legend, but we had both witnessed it happen twice now. It was too weird to ignore. The next day at school, we told our other friends about what had happened, and the whole group agreed on one thing: never say Patrick's name 3 times in one conversation again. It became an unspoken rule among us, a way to avoid any more creepy encounters. For a while, things were fine. A few months passed, and I started to think maybe we had overreacted. That is, until the night things took a terrifying turn. It was a normal evening at my friend Johnny's house. A bunch of us were hanging out on his back deck, me, Gabby, Laura, Luke, and Johnny. We were enjoying the cool night air, just talking about anything and everything. Eventually, as conversations do, we found ourselves talking about Patrick again. Despite everything we told him, Johnny refused to believe the stories we had about Patrick. Even after confirming the events with the entire group, he was still skeptical. To prove his disbelief, Johnny grinned at us mischievously and, to our horror, said Patrick's real name 3 times in a row, all in one breath. I held my breath, my stomach twisting in knots. For a moment, nothing happened, and Johnny looked at us triumphantly, calling us stupid for believing something so ridiculous. Just as I started to relax, thinking maybe Johnny was right, and we had overreacted, I saw him. Patrick was standing at the edge of Johnny's backyard, just beyond the fence. Johnny was the first to notice him, and he stopped talking mid-sentence. The rest of us turned and saw him too. Patrick didn't say anything, didn't move, just stared at us from the shadows. We were all frozen, unsure of what he would do next. After what felt like an eternity, he turned, jumped over Johnny's fence, and disappeared into the night. Johnny's face went pale. He accused us of setting him up, insisting that we had somehow conspired with Patrick to scare him, but we hadn't. We swore up and down that we had nothing to do with it. The mood was completely ruined after that. Johnny eventually told us all to go home, clearly shaken by the encounter. But the scariest experience was yet to come. This one still gives me chills just thinking about it. A few months after the incident at Johnny's house, I was home alone one night. My parents were out, which was rare, so I figured I'd make the most of it. I invited over a boy I'd been talking to, a guy who, looking back, wasn't the best choice, but hey, I was young and impulsive. It was raining lightly outside, the kind of soft rain that makes everything feel more intimate and cozy. We were in my room talking when the conversation inevitably drifted to Patrick. I visibly cringed when his name came up, and the guy I was with noticed. He asked me what was up, so I explained the whole situation to him. He laughed, like really laughed, and told me he was going to say Patrick's name to scare me. I begged him not to. I told him how serious I was, but he didn't listen. Instead, he yelled Patrick's name 3 times, not just saying it, but screaming it at the top of his lungs. What happened next was immediate. The rain outside suddenly picked up, becoming a torrential downpour in a matter of seconds. Then, there was a flash of lightning, illuminating my driveway. I ran to the window, my heart pounding. And that's when I saw it, a silhouette standing in my driveway, looking up at my window. I couldn't see the person's face, but I was 99% sure it was Patrick. I shut the blinds, panic flooding through me. I bolted downstairs to make sure all the doors were locked. As I locked the back door, I saw him again, this time standing motionless in my front yard. My mind was racing. I could feel a panic attack coming on, and I was convinced Patrick was going to find a way into my house. In desperation, I started shouting, I'm adopted, over and over again, hoping that somehow it would make him stop. I knew there was no way he could hear me, but I was beyond rational thought at that point. The guy I was with came rushing downstairs trying to calm me down, but I was hysterical. I looked out the window again, and Patrick was gone. The rain was still coming down hard, but he had vanished into the storm. The next morning, after the guy had left, I went outside to check the yard, hoping to find some sort of explanation for what had happened. What I found was worse than anything I could have imagined. In the far corner of my backyard, I saw Patrick's hoodie. Wrapped inside it were several of my belongings, things I thought I had lost months ago. I was too scared to call the police. Instead, I decided to wait for my parents to come home the next day and show them what I had found, but I never had to. The next day at school, Patrick didn't show up. He didn't show up the day after that, or the day after that. None of us ever saw him again. To this day, I don't know what happened to him. I've heard rumors that some people from school saw him lurking around, hiding, and eavesdropping on conversations, which could explain how he always knew when his name was said. It's possible he was just a mentally ill kid with stalker tendencies, following me and others around, listening in on our conversations, waiting for the right moment to appear. But the truth is, I'll never know for sure. All I know is that Patrick disappeared from our lives, and the unsettling memories of him remain. My parents still live in the same house where all of this happened. Every time I visit, I can't help but wonder where Patrick is now, and if he ever thinks about us the way we still think about him.